My name is Richard Petherbridge, and I have the honor and pleasure of speaking to Edgar Giffenig concerning the audiobook that we recently completed. And I'd like to start by having Edgar tell us a little bit about his experience playing tennis.
Thank you, Richard. Tennis has always been in my life. My grandparents were some of the top players in Mexico. My grandfather played Davis Cup. My grandmother won the national championship several times. And so I grew up going to the club. My mother used to take me when I was very young, and slowly I started playing. And once I turned about 9, 10, I started getting more serious about it. And so I competed national tournaments, and I was always one of the top players in Mexico. And once I turned 18, I got a scholarship to the University of Texas, where I played 4 years. It was a strong team. It was fun. I enjoyed competing. And after that, I graduated in business administration, so I started working for Procter and Gamble. But while I was working for Procter and Gamble, I loved to go to the club afterwards and teach some and play some. And after a couple of years, one of the parents of one of the juniors that I was coaching asked me to accompany his son to play ITF tournaments around the world. There's a big junior circuit around the world. So we did that, and I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun coaching. And so I went back to the University of Texas as an assistant coach and got a master's in exercise physiology this time, really trying to focus on doing a better job coaching. And while I was there, we actually won the national championship in singles with Steve Bryan and got to the finals in doubles with Mitch Michalka and Penman. And after that, I started working a little bit for the USTA, and I ended up working for Nick Saviano and traveling with the national teams for 5 years. Then I went to Germany and worked there for their national team for 3 years. Then I went to Mexico and also worked for the federation, and I ran the Mexican training center, national training center, and had most of the top Mexican junior players there. And that's basically the biggest part of my career was with high performance players. But once my daughters were around 11, 12, I didn't want to travel as much, so we went back to the United States. I worked 1 year at a tennis academy in Florida, and then we moved to Connecticut. I was hired to work with a player there privately, and once I got to Connecticut, I started working with a lot more diverse group of players, diverse in age and diverse in abilities. And so since then I've run a couple of clubs. I've coached high school tennis, and I can say in my career I've worked with players of all ages and of all levels for many years. I still enjoy playing tennis a lot, and that's what I'm doing.
Edgar, what made you decide to actually start writing books about tennis? Because it's very rare that tennis players who were very competitive players and coaches sort of have the writing skills and the knowledge to actually write about tennis.
I kind of always enjoyed reading and writing a little bit about what I was doing. It helped me kind of organize my ideas. And so I did that through several years while I was traveling with the top players. And 1 year I just decided, okay, let's put everything together. And it would be kind of a fun project to really explain to somebody exactly how I approach training high performance players. And that resulted in my first book, Developing High Performance Players. And after I did that, I enjoyed the process, I enjoyed the thinking, and then I thought to myself, well, nowadays I'm not really playing with high performance players, so let's write something that any tennis player can actually use, something practical, effective, and based in my experience all these years coaching. And that's how Play Tennis with Passion came about.
Great. Can you tell me about your new audiobook program?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited. Play Tennis with Passion, we made it an audiobook, and I love audiobooks myself. I think it just allows you a lot of freedom. And for myself, it has allowed me to listen to a lot of books that maybe I would not have had time to read. So the great thing about audiobooks is that you're on the way to work and you can easily just listen to 10 minutes and then take it on again after work. And so it's basically great. It's so I'm very excited about having my Play Tennis with Passion book as an audiobook.
Who would you recommend this audiobook for in terms of skill levels and age levels? What's your target audience?
I think it's probably mostly adults or a little bit older junior players that that basically can read something and apply it. It's very straightforward and easy to understand, but it's for avid players, passionate players that want to find ideas on how to improve their games. I mean, the problem with most players is that they kind of learn to play by experimenting a little bit. Maybe they take a few lessons, and after they can hit the ball over and start playing matches, most players usually just continue doing that. And they keep improving until it gets to a point where they really stop improving. And they keep playing and they keep doing the same thing, but they stop improving because they really don't know exactly what they're doing. They're just repeating the same thing over and over. And if they have mistakes, they are not correcting them. And also, usually they have a very narrow view of what the game of tennis is all about. And so in Playing with Passion, what I really try to do is I try to expand that knowledge and address or divide the game in 10 performance limiting factors that really determine your level as a player. The way I kind of, it's basically 10 chapters. Each chapters focus on one of these performance limiting factors. And if you improve one little thing in each of these chapters, you're going to be a much better player. Just for example, I'm just going to tell you what the 10 limiting factors are: consistency, precision, footwork, variety, ball speed, perception and anticipation, spin, camouflage or how to hide your strokes, choosing the right shot at the right time, and then performing under pressure. And so if you kind of think about it, any improvement in consistency or in your footwork or in your variety and your ability to hit balls with different spin heights, speeds, etc., or in your ability to hit with more spin or different spins, or if you're able to choose better shots that are going to give you a better chance of winning the point, any of these improvements is going to make you a better player. And so there's a lot in tennis that you can focus on. Most people just kind of think about, okay, how can I improve my forehand? And they just kind of think about like the form of their stroke. But there's so many things that affect the form. Most of the time, the problem is not really the form. The problem might be the footwork, might be tension, might be attention, might be not enough spin, might be not able to adapt. Maybe the pattern is right for certain types of shots, but not for every type of shot, because I mean, if you think about it, a forehand is a lot of different things. A forehand is everything that comes to my forehand side, which is high, low, spinny, soft, fast, etc. And I have to just adapt in order to do that. I cannot hit the ball the same way for every shot. So yeah, I think people that read the book or listen to the book are really going to have a total different idea of what the game of tennis is all about.
Edgar, we were talking about some of the benefits that your readers or listeners would get from listening to your audiobook. And as I was listening to your audiobook, I was struck by a couple of big themes that you point out, right? And like one of the themes that struck me is that frequently tennis players like to practice their strengths, but don't like to practice their weaknesses. And that they'll never get better just practicing their strengths, but they also have to practice their weaknesses. And the other thing that struck me is that tennis players kind of fall into this pattern where they either play matches or they sort of rally with their friends. And you point out in your book that the way you get better is through deliberate practice, right? You have to analyze your game, and you have to be very specific about, do you have a good top spin forehand? Do you have a good top spin backhand? You have to go through all the elements of your game, and then you have to come up with a practice regime, right? That allows you to develop all of the different strokes. Can you talk a little bit about those things and how your listeners are going to benefit from your audiobook?
I mean, in effect, when you're playing tennis, it's basically a battle. You're trying to beat somebody, right? And so there are some things that work for you, some things that don't work for you. Ideally, you want to make the things that work for you better and to make them work better for you. But you also want to make sure that your weaknesses become less of a weakness. You got to find ways to hide those weaknesses. And so you really need to be pretty methodical about approaching the game if you want to improve, because you have to analyze, okay, what can I do well and what can't I do well? And you have to ask yourself questions like, okay, when I lose points, usually what happens? How do I lose the points? And when I'm winning the points, okay, so how do I win the points? And then you have to try to practice those situations over and over so that you feel more comfortable in that situation. For example, well, I usually lose a point when they hit it high to my backhand and I just kind of hit it, either I miss it or maybe I hit it short and then they're attacking me. Well, I mean, if you don't practice returning that high ball to your backhand over and over and over until you can at least hit it back in a neutral situation to where they cannot really hurt you, then that's always going to be a weakness, right? And I mean, a lot of players hate playing against players that make them uncomfortable. We all like to be comfortable. It's like, okay, I like to be comfortable in the court, and I like to have fun. And it's not a lot of fun when you play somebody that you hate playing against. It's we all have that guy. Oh, I hate playing against this guy because he keeps slicing the ball, or he keeps hitting those moon balls that I cannot do anything about, or he keeps just rushing the net, and I just get so nervous and I cannot do anything about that. And so our tendency is to say, okay, you know what? I'm never going to ask this guy to play again because I just don't like playing against. But actually, if you really wanted to improve, you should make this guy your best friend, and you should ask him to play over and over and over until you start figuring out how to handle his game. That's kind of the only thing. And human nature, it's a little bit like that, right? I mean, it's I want to get in shape, but I hate running. Well, I mean, it's just you have to try to you have to do something like that. And so tennis, it's a little bit like that. So we really don't like to do the things that we are not good at. But if I want to get better, that's how I get better, by doing the things I really don't like to do. That doesn't mean I never practice my strength. Of course, I want to practice my strength because I want to make sure that they're there when I need them. But it is also very, very important to practice the situations where you're not feeling very, very good.
Can you also talk to our listeners a little bit about the difference between just playing a practice match with a friend or just rallying with a friend and what you call deliberate practice in terms of how to improve as a player?
Well, deliberate practice is that you deliberately are focusing on improving a certain skill. It's just not you're not giving it you're not leaving it to chance. You're there because you want to improve something very specific. You can do that while playing with your buddy, but it might entail maybe losing a few times against him because you're trying something different. You're trying maybe if I want to be a better volleyer, for instance, well, maybe I'm going to play a match against my buddy who I always beat, but this time I'm just going to try to go to the net as much as possible. And so maybe what's that going to mean? Maybe it's going to mean that I don't beat him that time because I'm not that good at doing that. But if I want to improve that, that's kind of the price that I need to pay. In order to do this deliberate practice, the first thing is to kind of understand what you can and what you cannot do and what you should be improving. And like I said, a lot of players just say, okay, I just want to improve my backhand. But maybe it's not really the problem, the backhand. It might be the footwork, might be the perception that they're not really getting in position to hit that backhand well. And so, I mean, it's kind of nice to have a book and to have a lot of ideas. But I always, throughout the book, tell my readers, my listeners, that it's always good once in a while to work with a pro and just have somebody from the outside give you an idea of where you are. And then you can go back and try these things and focus on the thing that is really going to make a difference. Because we all have 100 things that we would like to do better. But you have to pick one or two things that you really think, okay, if I really improve these things, if I was able to spin my serve a little bit better and place it there, that I think would make a big difference because maybe I would not be double faulting when I get under pressure. So you have to really pick the one thing that is going to really make a difference and then work on it. Try to make sure that you do it often enough to where you start seeing an improvement. Once that improves enough, then maybe you can pick the next one that you think that you need to work on. So the problem that I see is that a lot of players know that they have to improve a lot of things. And so maybe they go on the court and they're thinking of so many different things that it's kind of hard to focus. And in any sport, you need a certain amount of repetition. I was talking to my mother this morning about golf because we went to play a little bit of golf, and I kind of always draw the parallels between the sports. And I was thinking, okay, putting, for instance, putting is a very simple motion, just puck, puck. I mean, it's very basic. There's not things that are technically so difficult, right? But when you watch the pro players, they're able to read the situation, and they're all able to tell the body simply, I need to get the ball in the hole. And the body kind of knows how fast they're going to hit it, how much backswing they need, and they just do it like that. But in order to be able to do that, you got to putt in different situations 10,000 times. You know, it's when I'm playing tennis, I've been playing tennis 50 years. So, I mean, when I hit a lob, it doesn't matter where I hit it from. It's going to be fairly close to the line. And how do? I don't really think while I'm running, okay, hit it a little harder, hit it a little softer. I just kind of, I'm at the situation and I just kind of let my body do it. But in order to get to that point, I needed to get to practice that situation over and over and over and over until my mind kind of understood what I wanted to do and was able to do it. And so there's a big gap between knowing what to do and being able to do it. And that is just practice, 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 practice. And that's kind of the deliberate practice. It's just practicing something very specific over and over and over until first it becomes a little bit better in practice, then it becomes a lot better in practice, then it becomes a little bit better under pressure, then becomes a lot better under pressure, and then you kind of don't have to think about it.
After listening to your audiobook and focusing a lot on this idea of deliberate practice, I talked to my partner, who I play matches with, and we also practice a lot together. And so we had this discussion about what we do on the practice court and how we play. And we noticed that we spent a lot more time rallying from the baseline, right? Hitting cross-court forehands, hitting cross-court backhands, or just rallying, than we did spending time at the net, or spending time returning serve, or spending time practicing lobs. And your book made us realize that we weren't practicing evenly the different skills that we needed, and that we needed to pay more attention to all of the different skill sets and divide our time more evenly. Do you find that other players have that same sort of problem that Terry and I have in terms of making sure that we allocate our time evenly between the different practice skills?
100%. And it doesn't really have to be even, but you got to touch on it. I'm just going to give you an example, for instance, overheads. Okay, overheads are not really that difficult. The problem is that nobody really practices. And so you don't have to spend the same amount of time hitting overheads as you do hitting forehands or backhands. But at least you need to spend some time doing it. And so most people just practice overheads. Maybe they take 3 to start, like their warm-up, and then they play. And then if the guy's lobbing them, maybe they hit 3 or 4 overheads. That's it. And obviously they miss 2 or 3. And they, oh my God, how can I miss that overhead? Well, I mean, you've never hit overheads. You should be missing. So, I mean, it happens to me in the high school kids, for instance. The high school kids, all they want to do is blast it. You know, they hit it hard from the eighth, blah, blah, blah. And they're terrible at overheads because first, none of them lobs to each other, so they don't really have a chance to practice. But when they do, I mean, there's always a lottery. So my practice with the high school kids is making sure that they both know how to lob and how to hit overheads. And maybe we spend 10 minutes or 15 minutes during the practice. But if you just do a little bit, that's going to be enough to make you decent at that. Same thing with volleys, same thing with serves and returns. For instance, everybody that you ask is, oh, serve and returns are the 2 most important shots in tennis because that's how you start every single point. Yeah, when do you practice serve and return? Well, maybe 5 minutes at the end of practice, somebody serves. And what about returns? Well, returns is whenever, maybe nowhere, and maybe never, you know. I mean, so those are the discrepancies that you find in the game. And a lot of people also like never play matches. And so they're surprised that when they play matches, it's like, oh my God, I thought my forehand was good and it's terrible. Well, it's good if you know the ball is coming to you and you're going to hit it to that side, you know, and you can hit 20 in a row cross court because you know where it's coming and you know where you're hitting. But when suddenly the opponent comes to a net and you're watching them instead of watching the ball, and then there's also a lot of different types of forehand, you know. So I think one of the biggest mistakes people do is, okay, let's practice a forehand. So, okay, we're going to practice cross-court forehands, 20 minutes. And so they're receiving the same shot, they're sending the same shot, and they're only practicing that. Instead of maybe saying, okay, let's practice 5 minutes lobbing the forehand. Let's practice 5 minutes slicing the forehand. Let's practice 5 minutes hitting topspin on the forehand. Let's practice 5 minutes hitting deep topspin with the forehand. Let's practice 5 minutes hitting slow forehand shots. Let's practice 5 minutes fast forehand shots. Tennis is a game of adapting, not a game of performing one skill. It's the ability to take one skill, like the forehand swing, and adapt it to the conditions so that you can receive any type of forehands and be able to send any type of forehands that you might need.
Another thing that my partner and I talked about is that one of the things that we noticed we didn't practice, and again, it was listening to your book that made us realize that we had to be more analytical about how we practice and develop all of the skills, is what I call, sort of the spontaneous tennis, where, you're, let's say you have an opponent that hits a lot of high sort of floaty balls to you, and they're backing you up, and it's hard to attack. And of course, what you have to do is you got to take some of those balls out of the air and come to the net. But we never practice that, right? We practice our ground strokes, we practice our volleys, we practice our overheads. Can you give us some ideas about how your deliberate practice would be applied to, some of those situations where you have to be a little more spontaneous? You have to read the ball, see that it's a high floaty ball, and decide to take it out of the air and put pressure on your opponent.
Okay, let's take the same example that you're giving me. Okay, the first thing that you need to practice is the technical aspect. That means, okay, if somebody hits a high ball, okay, there's two options basically. I either return it high again, maybe catch it early and hit it off the bounce and attack it, or hit it in the air. Okay, so the first thing that you need to practice is making sure that you can do those three things. Hit it back high, deep, catch it off the bounce and maybe at the shoulder level and be a little bit more aggressive with it. And what kind of shot are you going to use when you hit it out of the air? Are you going to hit a regular volley or a topspin volley? So whatever it is, you just got to make sure that technically you can do that. If you cannot do that, then it doesn't help you to know that, right? So it's like me telling one of my players, you know what, next time, why don't you hit a drop shot off the backhand slice? Well, if the player doesn't know how to hit a drop shot with the backhand slice, then it doesn't matter that I'm telling him that and that he needs to use it. The first thing is to be able to technically do that. Then what you do is, okay, in what situation do I encounter this? Okay, let's practice that situation. So maybe you say, okay, so force me to the side. I'm going to hit you a high ball back, and then you are going to go in and hit that volley. Okay, and we're going to practice only those three shots. Okay, you give me a forcing shot, I lift it, and you run forward and take it out of the air. And then, okay, once I understand, okay, it is in this situation that I'm looking for that shot, then, okay, let's play. Next time that we play, let's really try to pay attention to make sure that we don't miss any opportunities to do that. And so that is kind of the progression. It's the same thing. It's like, okay, if I know that if I'm off the court, I'm going to hit a high defensive backhand cross-court shot. Okay, so step one, making sure that you can run and hit that high defensive backhand cross-court shot. You cannot do it, then somebody needs to feed you balls, and you run and hit it high. You run and hit it high. You run and hit it high. Okay, that is step one. So now step two is, okay, so let's rally. And then once in a while, I'm going to hit you a wide shot. And you got to make sure that you get there and hit it high. Okay, and then, okay, let's play some points and let's pay attention to that situation. So that's kind of a little bit the process. It's like technical first, then a limited tactical situation where you say, okay, let's do this, and then once in a while, give me that shot, and then, okay, let's open it up and see what happens.
Edgar, how can listeners benefit most from your book? Should they just listen to it once? Should they listen to it repeatedly? What's your advice on how to get the most out of the audiobook?
The audiobook really has a lot of information. So reading it or listening to it once will give you several ideas. But it is not written in such a manner that you have to read it from the beginning to the end every time. It is divided in those 10 chapters. And really, after you listen to it once, what you really need to do is you just need to just keep it reachable. And then anytime that you might want to focus on one of these areas, improving your consistency or your perception or maybe your mental game, then just go back to that section and just listen to that section. And the way it's written, it's going to give you the problem, the solutions, and more importantly, exactly how to work on those areas specifically with drills and everything. So it's very straightforward, and I only really present the instruction and the drills and the corrections that have worked for me over almost 40 years of coaching. So I think it's a book that you want to keep by your side and just check whenever you feel like it.
Edgar, in your opinion, as tennis players improve and develop their skills, will they benefit by going back and listening again to your audiobook? Is it the type of thing where a beginner doesn't understand all of the details, and as he becomes more intermediate or advanced, when he listens to the audiobook again, he's going to hear and benefit more from it?
100%. I mean, I think depending on your level, a lot of these subjects might be quite foreign to you. And maybe the first time you read them, you don't quite understand exactly because your level might not be quite there yet. But as you improve, you get better, then you start experiencing and experimenting with these other subjects that maybe seem foreign to you before, but now you're starting to kind of understand. So going back and listening to it again, it's going to almost be like, oh, wow, I didn't really get that the first time.
Edgar, now that we've talked a little bit about how your listeners are going to benefit, their tennis skills and their game is going to benefit enormously from your audiobook, where can they go to buy your audiobook?
Well, they can go to www.Triana Audiobooks. We're going to put the links at the end, and also on Amazon. And Amazon, I have my written books, and on the side, they're going to be able to buy the audiobook. So those are the main places where you can get it.
Edgar, it's been a pleasure, and I've learned so much from this interview. Is there anything in closing that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I mean, I guess the most important thing is, if you're serious about improving, you have to really mix practice with match play and use the match play as almost like a little test. You know, that's really what it's all about. Playing better tennis, it's all about playing better when you're playing against somebody else. So playing a match. So when you're playing a match, you need to matches are not so that you get either really happy because you won or really sad because you lost, but what you really need to ask yourself is, what did I do well today and what needs to be better, and how can I get better at the things that need to get better. And that's where, if you're not quite sure, maybe you can go back to the book and figure it out. Or like I said before, it's always good to have somebody, a trustworthy pro around, that you can ask questions. And then you just got to spend some time on the court. It's very difficult to really improve if you're just playing once every 2 weeks or something like that. So you really have to be serious and put hours. It's all about how many times does your racket touch that ball? How many times does your racket touch that ball? The more that your racket touches that ball, the better a chance that you're going to get better. And definitely knowing what you need to do is totally different than being able to do it. To be able to do it, you have to just practice, 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 practice. That's it. And I wish everyone great luck on court. And I am 100% sure that you are going to improve if you follow that advice on the book.
Edgar, thank you so much for taking your valuable time and talking to our listeners about how this audiobook can really make them much better players.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.